Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night to you lovely folks joining me here nice and early at Marvel Snap Zone. Welcome back for the first installment of our weekly tier list segment for the Ant-Man Quantumania season. This series is a fantastic one where I'll walk you through the current state of the metagame in Marvel Snap and rank the most popular decks by breaking down their strengths in the current metagame. The first week of a brand new season is always an exciting one, especially when we've had some nerfs to go alongside the overall global release. As a result of this brand new environment, I am begging you to not take this first tier list as anything set in stone. Things are still moving for every single deck on this list, whether that's the cards they include or their matchups overall. Also, because we're still this early in the metagame, almost no deck has a solid 12 cards most of the community has agreed on yet. If you check the potential additions section of the article linked in the description box down below, you will often see other versions and other deck lists of all kinds of the archetypes that I'm featuring in today's video. The reason for those can be maybe you want to play a version without a Series 5 card. Maybe we just want to offer you a foundation for the deck to work from. If you're missing a card like something like Shuri, or maybe Sauron in Shuri Zero, for example. Or simply sometimes there are several lists and similar results and popularity, and picking one felt like it was a completely subjective take overall. Please make sure you take a look at the full write-up for a deck before making up your mind about any given list, or leaving comments about Mr. Streamer, where is X deck in the description box for me, because it might very well be there, and it's well worth checking. With all of that, it's time for us to break down the tier list in full, and then start looking at each of these deck lists and giving you an idea of what you should be looking for, looking to play with, and how to beat some of the best decks in Marvel Snap. As always, if you are looking for budget options on our tier list, there are a few. You can go and give a click on the website now. We're not going to run them down for you in the video just to save a bit of time, but if you're working with Pool 2 or maybe missing some key cards from any of these lists, there are some budget options that we firmly believe can compete in the metagame right now, available at just a click for you. Go check it out. Tier 4 this week is a little bit weird. We've decided that there is not enough data for us to really get an idea of what could thrive in the future just yet. So for now, Tier 4 is being left as a more data needed section. Expect its return sometime in the next couple weeks. Tier 3 this week offers you a couple of options. Cerebro 2 putting up a decent showing this time around, finding itself at the bottom of our third tier. Hela Discard and Discard Lockjaw, defendable versions of the deck and looking to thrive off the back of the release of MODOK. Last but not least, good cards Dino finding itself in the lowest position it's been in a very long time, being outshone by some of the alternatives you could choose to play with very similar play patterns instead. We'll look into exactly why that is in just a few moments. Tier 2 this week is full of some of your old friends and some new faces as well. Patriot putting up a good showing in the early days, much what you would expect from a consistent, well-established archetype. The same can be said for Deathwave, a deck back on the rise following the nerf of Leader, its most prominent counterplayer in Marvel Snap. Zabu Negative, a new take on the negative archetype looking to abuse the fact that Zabu is now an extra copy of Psylocke, making its way into Tier 2 this week and looking to continue that climb in the near future. Last but not least, at the very top of our second tier, Galactus is putting on a showcase with good matchups against most of the top decks in the game right now by eliminating most of the things they care about and narrowing the game down to just one lane. There are 4 contenders in our top tier this week, much flexibility and many opportunities to get ahead of your opponents here. Lockjaw On Reveal has risen to the cream of the crop for the first time in a very long time, improving overall and having great matchups against the rest of the room. I look forward to walking you through that one in a minute. Zabu Devil Darkhawk is the leftover remnants of the Rock Slide Darkhawk deck of last season. It is still a formidable contender, if not slightly more fair than before, so keep your eyes open, it is out there. Zabu Control, a deck list we actually made a video for you yesterday to go and check out if you want to see some gameplay. Rising to the top when everyone else is fighting for priority, you get to be super reactive and beat them on the final turn where it really matters. Last but not least, the kingpin of the game right now is Shuri Zero. Biggest point scores, easiest way to win, and some of the most linear play patterns Marvel Snap has to offer make this deck a truly formidable force and currently the best deck in Marvel Snap. Silent Performance of the Week is actually quite an all-star segment this week. Thanos' ongoing Surfer move and a She-Hulk combo deck all find themselves in Silent Performers due to a lack of data, although they are performing exceptionally well and getting the kind of cube averages we would expect for a deck to appear on the tier list. If we had to rank them, they would likely be somewhere between tier 2 and the top of tier 3 this week, as they aren't the best when it comes to a point shootout, but they are possibly the future kings of flexibility. So let's start breaking down these deck lists, starting with the champion, Shuri Zero. As expected, Shuri Zero rose to the top of the rankings for this first week. The deck is representing the strongest unnerfed deck from the previous metagame. There are still a lot of questions around this archetype though, and I wouldn't claim we were in Shuri's world just yet. Indeed, compared to Zabu last month, the deck has some established counters and seems way more manageable than Zabu Darkhawk was. Shang-Chi in particular, but also Valkyrie, are great cards in order to counter the huge numbers this deck can slam on turn number 5. Galactus is doing a great job as well, as it seems to simply destroy the buffed card if it doesn't come down in the same location, feeding its null in the process. Baero is another card which can help control where the points will end up, and considering the lane that has a 30-point red skull in it is probably lost already, why not make the Taskmaster join it and win the other two instead? So yes, Shuri Zero did live up to the expectations many placed on the deck when we knew Zabu and Silver Surfer were going to be on the chopping block. However, this one is maybe not as dominant as some of the stronger decks in the previous metagame. However, Zabu isn't gone from Marvel Snap. In fact, far from it. Zabu Control making an appearance for us next, as the card is pushing several archetypes this week. The best performing one, although be it not the most popular one, is Zabu Control, a deck using the energy reduction abilities of Zabu and Sarah in order to counter the opponent on turn 6 of the game. With both cards in play, you can easily play Shang-Chi or Enchantress to deny a lane from your opponent, and then push the other one with proactive cards at the same time. A very similar archetype did exist in the previous metagame, but the deck never really made it to being a contender. During the first week, we've seen tons of decks relying on sheer power to beat their opponent, creating the perfect environment for such a build to rise through the rankings. The biggest factor in this ranking is the ability to get 8 cube wins with this deck. Most decks reveal their strategy right now on turn 4 or turn 5, which means Zabu Control has all the information it needs to know if it needs to stay in a game or whether it needs to run with its tail between its legs. And also, because you haven't done anything particularly threatening up until that point, there's a good chance your opponent doesn't feel the need to retreat either. Zabu Devil Darkhawk is another tier 1 contender this week. The deck, which managed to rise to the top of the rankings in the previous metagame, has not suffered a dramatic fall just yet. The biggest difference currently is that disruptive cards are much harder to use when we can't cheat on energy anywhere near as efficiently as we did in the past. Nevertheless, Zabu on turn 2 and Rockslide or White Queen on turn 3 are still very strong early plays, enough to build towards our win condition in the second portion of the game. There could be several reasons this deck is still ranked so high. First of all, it could be that Zabu wasn't nerfed hard enough and still feels like a premium card when played on turn 2. The next one could be the trio of Devil Dinosaur, Darkhawk and Mystique, which are incredibly strong when it comes to developing points on several lanes, and Baero is one hell of a good card to close the deal when you're already ahead. Lastly, it just feels like this deck is more than just good win conditions. The support cards here are also some of the best ones in the game. Quinjet and Sentinel give you a 3 power card for 1 energy every single turn. White Queen, Agent Coulson, these serve to find you options if you would be missing something otherwise and represent solid points while feeding Devil Dinosaur. Moon Girl and Quinjet are also just a huge deadly duo, well known at this point overall, and when Zabu's added into that mix, it makes our created 4-cost cards come back to costing 2 energy, and we know what happens in that timeline. The last tier 1 deck of the week is Lockjaw On Reveal. It was already a solid tier 2 deck at the end of last season, But Lockjaw has been one of the best win conditions during the first week of Quantum Realm. For now, it's unclear whether the Thor version or the Thanos version of this deck is the better one when we're looking at just the numbers. But our guess is the Thanos one is likely to have a higher ceiling overall, the stones bringing you some flexibility into the equation. But the Thor version is more widely played, and probably a bit more reliable in getting big cards from Lockjaw. No matter which one you pick though, it seems Lockjaw On Reveal is the best deck with a pull 3 card serving as its foundation right now. The success can probably be explained by the way the very proactive metagame has been seen in this first week. Lockjaw is great at disguising its true potential until the moment we go all in on the card. Compared to Shuri or discard decks, it does a great job at hiding the amount of total points it's going to develop for you, making it harder to counter for opponents that are looking to gather information before they commit their key resources. Moving down to tier number 2, we've got Galactus in a field where most decks are looking to kind of enforce their strategy upon their opponent. Galactus seems to have been a great pick this week for punishing careless players. Also, Spider-Man, being mostly gone from the metagame, pushed this deck back up to the top of tier 2. The deck is actually very close to being a tier 1 option, but the others above it are more flexible in the way they can snap and retreat. Now that Galactus is popular enough for players who have completed pool number 3, it's probably the deck with the biggest amount of retreats overall. No one's going to stay in a match where you don't have to have the tools to win a soul lane all by itself. On the flip side, an opponent who's able to punish you will likely do it on turn 5 with Baero, Professor X or Cosmo, leading to the Galactus player being the one retreating instead. Based on this inability to win 8 cubes, and being forced to kind of collect cubes at only 2 at a time, with a very aggressive snap strategy to go with that, Galactus feels like a great deck, but not necessarily one suited for climbing the ladder in the fastest possible way. Zabu Negative has been one of the most popular decks this week. Mr. Negative finds once again a reason to be among the most abused cards at the start of a new metagame, largely because a good hand just means a snap on turn 1 or turn 2, allowing you to force a high stakes game from your opponent very early. This time, the reason is Zabu, serving as a second copy of Psylocke, helping to keep Mr. Negative on turn 3 more often. This core idea is pretty great, but the rest of the list is still very difficult to figure out right now, and there are very different takes as shared currently. The pairing with Silver Surfer was the highest ranked one in our data compared to the others featured in the article, so we're going to go into this one as the default build this week. However, among all the decks on our list so far, Negative Zabu Surfer might be the one to doubt the most. In the last metagame, this pairing already existed, and it lost the battle to Sarah Miracle Surfer in the end, with the deck almost disappearing completely by the end of the season. It's way too early to tell the fate of Mr. Negative in this particular metagame, but figuring out the best list is probably the next logical step to see where this one ends up. Up next, we've got Deathwave. The Destroy synergy was kind of expected to make a comeback after Leader was nerfed, and Deathwave is now finally able to go back to its Wave on 5, Death plus She-Hulk plus Baero on turn 6 without being annoyed. The comeback did happen if we look at the deck's popularity, second behind Discard Dracula since the start of the new season. But when taking a look at the deck's cube average, we're further from that second place, far behind the likes of Shuri, Zabu and Lockjaw. So how do we explain that? Well, Armor is still a great looking card and sees play as a default 2-cost card in many decks. The deck is most punishing on turn number 6, and most opponents know what's coming at that point and are only staying in if they have a real shot at beating you. Most importantly, perhaps, Death also sees play in Galactus and Discard Hela, while She-Hulk is slowly just becoming a staple of the metagame all around. As a result, Wave isn't quite as disruptive on the average opponent. Up next, we've got Patriot. When you're in a new environment, everyone looks for a good, old, reliable deck. Exactly what Patriot will provide you. If you're very high in collection level, like above 4,000, you probably are not seeing this archetype too much. However, if you're still collecting pool 3, let's say below 3,000 mark, Patriot is probably part of your daily routine at this point. Because Discard is so popular and there is no space in those decks to include tech cards like Enchantress, Patriot can reliably develop its game plan in most of its matches. Sure, the occasional rogue from Mr. Negative or Enchantress from these budget Shuri Zero lists can ruin your day, but the global environment feels pretty good for Patriot currently. Killmonger in the Deathwave deck should be considered a problem, but losing priority and playing Ultron on turn 6 while you already have Patriot and your other buffs on the table is usually the solution to that one. Down into tier number 3 we go, where the new kid on the block, Discard Dracula, finds itself this week. The king of the Discard synergy, Dracula and Lockjaw seem to have been outshining Hela in this first week of play to know who gained Modok's favour. Currently, the archetype represents more than 20% of the metagame and can be seen built a little differently depending on who you ask. All the ideas, however, share a common trait. They all look to high roll a good hand and snap aggressively early. The deck got better compared to when Modok joined it. The lack of flexibility to adapt to what the opponent does, or the locations you see can definitely still hurt a ton. As such, the best way to rack up cubes with this deck seems to be to snap early on when you have good hands, and get at least 2 cubes when your opponent realizes they aren't going to beat your very, very big Morbius and Dracula. Unless someone finds a way to add more flexibility to these builds, however, it's hard to imagine Discard rising higher than the top of tier 3 in the current set of things. Maybe playing Doctor Doom instead of the Infinite could help in that regard. Good card Devil Dino finding its way trending downwards this week in a very similar fashion to the same build, including Darkhawk in tier 1. The good card archetype has defaulted to the Devil Dinosaur package for now, until it figures out the best standalone cards to include in the current metagame. Compared to the list with Darkhawk, however, this one is doing significantly worse on how many points it can develop, but Sunspot and She-Hulk are starting to look like a very solid duo, and they're seeing a lot of play currently too. Alongside armor, they form a current trio of fittest in any deck that has extra slots. Unfortunately, losing Darkhawk immediately tanks the deck in the rankings, as the card really synergizes with Zabu, allowing you to include Mystique as well, and provides both points flexibility and potential. The last part is particularly important in the current environment, where you need to be very strong on both lanes you're looking to win to have a shot at the game. Otherwise, you're going to struggle beating big Red Skulls, Morbiuses, Draculas, and other cards that can contest a lane that contains a Devil Dinosaur. Hela Discard also finds itself in tier number 3, the more flexible of the discard archetypes, and doesn't really suffer from the same location problems that Dracula Discard might. The issue Hela suffers from is its complete unreliability regarding the execution of its game plan on a large sample size. Compared to other win conditions, Hela still has one of the highest ceilings available in the game. However, it doesn't seem high enough to warrant the risk it represents when you look at how often it happens compared to the more popular win conditions on our list. On paper, you just have to play Invisible Woman, Modok and Hela on the same location. Then profit as your whole hand is summoned into play, and your opponent will realise how stupid it was to let you do that. But in reality, you'll be met with a Cosmo in front of your Invisible Woman, Polaris to change where she is, Baero to prevent Hela being played behind her, Rogue to steal your Invisible Woman. There are simply too many ways to counter Hela's discard setup currently. As a result, there are different ways to build Hela, all looking for the most reliable way to get that combo underway. For now though, none of these lists seem to be able to compete with the other discard archetypes, but the season is still very young, and that could change very soon. Cerebro 2 brings up the rear this week. The archetype is clearly lacking the high roll potential that other decks on this list seem to have. The ability to count precisely how many points will be in play really hurts Cerebro to keep opponents in games they know they've lost, and to avoid being snapped against in games they know they can't win. Nevertheless, Cerebro 2 is a very fair deck, able to be quite strong on 2 locations that it has its eyes on winning. It just feels like a repeat of last season, where the deck was popular and good enough to be mentioned, but never really in the conversation for the best or most impactful deck. There is a lot to digest in this first week of play, especially as Discard kind of dominated the popularity poll, but never appeared to be tier 1 material. As such, when reading this data, it's been easy to get confused between the most popular decks and the best performing ones. Currently, I would say Tier 1 is looking very, very solid, and Galactus probably deserves its spot at the top of Tier 2. Below that, however, it's hard to figure out which decks are performing because a lot of them are comfort picks, and which ones are actually here to stay for the whole season is very much up for debate. Also, it feels like a lot of decks are still being refined right now as we speak, and only the proactive, self-centered game plans have really made it in this first week. As our silent performers section is kind of showing you, some more intricate builds are in the works from players around the world, but logically these take more time to come to fruition. Hopefully we don't have to wait too long to see these reach their full potential and convince enough players to really give us a larger sample size to talk about these archetypes. But until then, I hope you're having fun in the quantum realm, and hopefully you're a fan of the discard synergy, because I have to admit this week has been really fun for me. As usual, you can find the entire Marvel Snap Zone team in the community Discord server down below, with thousands of other Marvel Snap players. If you want to come and talk about this tier list with us and let us know what you think. Last but not least, if you want to talk to us personally, you can do that too. You can find Marvel Snap Zone over on Twitter, DenCCG on Twitter, or myself at HowlingMines. But until next time, I've been HowlingMines, you've been amazing, and this has been our first tier list of the Ant-Man Quantumania season. I'll see you soon.